I wore the same navy blazer I'd had since my second year at Hargrove and Sloan. It still fit. That was the only thing I could say for certain about that night. The blazer still fit, and everything else was about to fall apart in ways I hadn't planned for. The company retreat was held at the Kessler Lodge outside Asheville, North Carolina. 3 days, 2 nights, all expenses covered, mandatory attendance dressed up as optional enthusiasm. The kind of event where the catered dinner costs more per plate than my monthly student loan payment, and everyone pretends not to notice. I'd been to 2 of these before. I knew the drill. Find a corner near the windows, hold a drink you don't finish, smile when someone makes eye contact, leave early enough to seem professional, but late enough not to seem antisocial. I was good at disappearing in plain sight. I'd been doing it for 4 years. My name is Fiona. I was 34. A senior financial analyst at Hargrove and Sloan, a mid-size consulting firm that liked to describe itself as boutique in press releases and scrappy in all-hands meetings. I had built 3 forecasting models that the partners used in client pitches without attribution. I had caught a billing error that saved the firm $340,000 in a single quarter. I had mentored 2 junior analysts who were now making more than me because they knew how to talk in rooms I didn't get invited to. I was very good at my job. I was very bad at my job. I was very bad at making sure anyone knew it. That Friday evening, I was standing near the window with a glass of sparkling water. I was pretending was something more interesting, watching the sun go down over the Blue Ridge Mountains, when I heard him before I saw him. His name was Preston. He was 27, the CFO's son, and he had been given the title of Strategic Initiative Director 8 months ago, after finishing an MBA he'd started and restarted twice. He had the kind of confidence that isn't built from anything, it's just inherited, like the shape of your nose or a trust fund. He wore expensive watches and said things like synergize without irony. He had never, to my knowledge, completed a single deliverable on time. He had the microphone. Someone had handed it to him because it was that kind of evening. After dinner remarks, department highlights, the usual performance of corporate togetherness. He was supposed to talk about Q3 pipeline projections for 3 minutes. He talked for 11. Then he said something that stopped the room. "And I want to give a special shout-out," he said, grinning at the crowd, "to our data team, specifically to," he paused, scanning the room, making a show of it, "Fiona. Where are you?" I raised my hand slightly, old instinct, like being called on in class when you weren't paying attention. "There she is," he said. "Now, for those of you who don't know Fiona, and honestly I get it, she's easy to miss. She's been with us 4 years. She does all the number stuff, really great at spreadsheets." He paused for laughter. He got some. "So I just want to say, Fiona, on behalf of the whole strategy team, thanks for keeping the lights on while the rest of us do the real work." The room had that particular silence that happens when everyone is deciding at the same time whether what just happened was a joke or something else. I stood there with my sparkling water and I smiled. I smiled because I had practiced smiling through things for a very long time, and because there were 140 people watching, and because I did not yet have a plan, but I was starting to make one. The next morning, I went for a walk before breakfast. The kind of walk where you're not really looking at the scenery, you're just moving because staying still feels dangerous. I went past the fire pit, past the equipment shed, down to the small creek that ran along the south edge of the property. I sat on a rock, and I thought about 4 years. 4 years of quarterly models that I built from scratch and sent to partners who presented them as their own thinking. 4 years of "we'll circle back on compensation" conversations that circled back to nothing. 4 years of watching Preston and people like Preston get promoted into titles that meant nothing and paid everything, while I got a 2.8% merit increase and a Starbucks gift card at Christmas. The previous year, I had flagged a structural error in the Meridian Group engagement, a client worth $2.1 million in annual fees. The error would have cost them the entire contract. I found it on a Thursday night at 9 p.m., fixed it by midnight, and sent the corrected model to the managing partner with a brief explanation. On Monday morning, he presented the corrected model to the client. In the meeting notes, it was attributed to the strategy team. I knew who the strategy team was. It was Preston. 2 associates who reported to Preston, and a project coordinator named Wendy who made great coffee and was also, incidentally, dating Preston. I sat by that creek for 40 minutes. Then I went back to the lodge, ate a bowl of oatmeal, and did something I had been putting off for 7 months. I opened my laptop and I started writing things down. Not a resignation letter, not a complaint, something more useful. I had been keeping notes for a while, dates, deliverables, email chains, the gap between what I produced and what got credited. I hadn't done anything with them because I kept thinking, surely this will correct itself. Surely someone will notice. Surely merit is visible. It is not. Merit is visible only when someone holds it up to the light on purpose. I started building what I privately called the ledger. Every engagement I had contributed to in a material way with documentation, every model I had built, every error I had caught, the revenue impact when I could calculate it. I pulled from emails, from version histories on shared drives, from Slack messages I had screenshotted out of instinct and filed away without knowing why. By the end of that retreat weekend, I had 17 pages. I also had something else. On Saturday afternoon, during the team-building kayaking activity that I had signed up for and immediately regretted, I ended up in a kayak next to a woman I had seen at the dinner the previous night but hadn't spoken to. She was maybe 60, compact, efficient in her paddling in a way that suggested she had done things more physically demanding than a North Carolina lake. She introduced herself as Constance. She said she was an old friend of one of the founding partners. I said that was nice. She said, "You're the analyst he insulted last night." I didn't say anything. "I've been watching this firm for a long time," she said. "I sit on 2 advisory boards, not this one yet." She paused her paddling. "What you said last night, you didn't say anything, but your face said everything worth knowing." "I wasn't aware I had an expressive face," I said. She laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, the kind that comes from a place of having seen a lot. "You should know," she said carefully, "that the Meridian Group is not happy. Not with Hargrove and Sloan. Something came out of that engagement that they feel wasn't disclosed properly. They've been quietly asking questions." She didn't explain further. She paddled ahead. I paddled behind her and thought about what I knew about the Meridian engagement, about the error I had found, about the version of the model that had been presented to the client versus the version I had fixed, about the specific line item that had been corrected, about the fact that someone had, apparently, uncorrected it before the final delivery. I went back to my ledger that night, and I added a new section. The Monday after the retreat, I came back to the office in Chicago with 17 pages of documentation, a new contact in my phone, and a very specific plan that I had to execute without looking like I was executing anything. The first thing I did was request a formal performance review. Not the end-of-year kind, a mid-cycle review. I sent the request to my direct manager, a woman I'll call my supervisor, because that's what she was to me, professionally and in every other sense, and I CC'd HR. I said I wanted to discuss my career trajectory and contributions to date. My supervisor looked mildly alarmed. She said she'd get something scheduled. It took 3 weeks. I spent those 3 weeks doing 2 things simultaneously: my job, with the same thoroughness and invisibility as always, and building the case that I was going to walk into that review with. The performance review was on a Thursday afternoon. I sat down across from my supervisor and the HR director, and I opened a folder and I said, "I'd like to walk through some specifics." I walked through 14 months of documented contributions, model by model, engagement by engagement. I showed them the version history on the shared drive time-stamped, showing my user account as the last editor on documents that had been presented as team products. I showed them the email where I flagged the Meridian error. I showed them the Slack thread where my supervisor had responded, "Great catch, let me handle it from here," and the subsequent record of what handling it had looked like. The HR director, whose name I will not use because she is ultimately not the point of this story, kept making a small noise in the back of her throat, like she was considering several responses and rejecting all of them. My supervisor said, Fiona, I understand you feel your contributions haven't been recognized. I don't feel that, I said pleasantly. I can demonstrate it. Those are two different things. There was a pause. What is it you're looking for here? The HR director asked. I'm looking for an accurate title and compensation that reflects my documented impact, I said. I've prepared a market comparison. I put another document on the table. Senior analysts with my demonstrated scope of work are earning between $115,000 and $128,000 in comparable firms in this market. I'm currently at $84,000. Another pause. Longer. There's a process for these things, my supervisor said. I'm in that process right now, I said. This is the process. They said they'd take it under advisement, that there were budget cycles to consider, that the end-of-year review was only 4 months away, that these things took time. I said I understood completely. I thanked them for their time. I walked out of that room knowing exactly what under advisement meant. I had 3 months. Here's what I had not told them in that meeting. Constance had made a phone call. I didn't know the details. What I knew was that 2 weeks after the retreat, she had texted me a single line. The Meridian situation is being looked at more carefully. I thought you should know. And then, 10 days after that, she had sent me the name of an attorney who specialized in financial services employment disputes. I called the attorney. Her name was Sybil. She was sharp in the way that I recognize now as a particular kind of sharp, not loud, not aggressive, just very precise about which questions to ask and in what order. She said, "Tell me about the Meridian model." I told her all of it. The error I found, the fix I submitted, the version that went to the client, and what I had since pieced together about what had changed between my fix and the final delivery. Sybil was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's not just an attribution problem." "No," I said. "That's potential fraud on a client engagement." "I know," I said. She told me what I needed to do. I did it. I won't detail every step because some of it is still in a file somewhere, but the short version is this. Sybil helped me compile a formal disclosure package. The documented evidence of the Meridian error, the version history, the email chain, and this was the piece I hadn't mentioned to anyone yet. A separate conversation thread I had found in a shared project folder that I had legitimate access to, in which Preston had discussed with the managing partner the decision to submit the original uncorrected model to the client, while quietly implementing the fixes internally for a later revision, in order to make the engagement appear more complex and justify a scope expansion billing cycle. In other words, they had billed Meridian for work that fixed a problem that shouldn't have existed in the first place, and they had done it knowingly. And I had been the one who found the problem, and they had used my fix as the basis for billing $180,000 in scope expansion fees, and my name was nowhere in any of it. The end-of-year review came. My supervisor sat across from me and told me, with genuine discomfort, that the firm was not in a position to adjust my compensation this cycle, that budget constraints were real, that my contributions were valued, that there might be opportunities in the new year. I said, "I appreciate you telling me directly." She looked slightly relieved. She thought I was being gracious. I was being precise. I needed to know the answer before the next week. The next Friday, Sybil filed a disclosure with the SEC and simultaneously sent a letter to the firm's general counsel. I had already accepted a position at a different firm, a larger one that had reached out to me after Constance had mentioned my name to 2 people she knew, which was how it turned out. The world actually worked when you knew how to use it. The letter to General Counsel laid out the documentation. It gave the firm 14 days to respond. It specified, among other things, the specific engagement, the specific billing practice, and the specific paper trail. It was a Friday afternoon. I was cleaning out my desk. Not dramatically, I had very few personal items, mostly a small succulent I'd had for 2 years, and a phone charger I'd been meaning to take home, when Preston came down the hall. He stopped when he saw the box. "What's going on?" he said. He said it lightly, the way he said most things, as if he hadn't quite yet been told there was a reason not to be light. "I've accepted another position," I said. "I'm leaving effective end of day." He stared at the box, then at me. Something passed across his face, not guilt exactly, but a recognition, the first one I'd seen from him. "Fiona," he started. "Preston," I said. "Have a good weekend." I picked up my box, tucked the succulent under my arm, and walked to the elevator. I don't know the exact sequence of what happened at Hargrove and Sloan after that, because I was no longer there, and because some of it is subject to things I agreed not to discuss in detail. What I can tell you is what I know. The Meridian Group terminated their contract with the firm. The termination came with a notice of dispute over the scope expansion billing, specifically the $180,000 cycle. The firm's general counsel initiated an internal review. The internal review, which had to examine version-controlled documents and billing records, did not go well for the people it examined. Preston's title of Strategic Initiatives Director was quietly removed. I don't know what he does now. I don't need to. My supervisor, who I believe is not fully aware of the Meridian billing scheme and who, to her limited credit, had at least documented my performance accurately, even if she hadn't acted on it, was placed on a performance improvement plan and eventually transitioned out of the firm in what was described in an industry newsletter as a restructuring. HR was not the employee's friend. I had learned that early. But in this case, HR was also not the firm's friend, because when the general counsel needed to understand who had known what and when, the HR records, including the notes from my mid-cycle performance review, which my supervisor had documented in the system, painted a picture that was difficult to explain. I had put everything in writing, not because I knew exactly how it would unfold, but because Sybil had told me that the most powerful thing an employee can do is force a paper trail into existence. My new job is in Denver. The firm is called Harker & Associates. Nothing to do with the old place, it's just a name. And I am a director of financial analysis. The title is accurate. The salary is $127,000. I have a team of 4 people whose work I credit by name in every document that leaves our department. I kept the succulent. It's on my desk in Denver, and it has inexplicably doubled in size. About 2 months after I left, I got a text from Constance. It said, "I heard it landed where it needed to." "Well done," I wrote back. "Thank you for the kayak conversation." She sent back a single emoji, a small boat. I think about that night at the Kessler Lodge sometimes. Preston at the microphone saying she's easy to miss. The 140 people deciding whether to laugh or not. The sparkling water I didn't drink. The mountain light going out through the windows. I was easy to miss. That was real. I had made myself easy to miss because I thought the work would speak, and I had learned, slowly and at some cost, that work speaks only when someone forces it to. Here's what I know now, that I didn't know then. The ledger is not optional. You document your contributions not because you're planning something, but because accurate records are how professionals protect themselves and how the truth eventually finds something to stand on. You are not invisible because you're forgettable. You are invisible because no one has been required to see you yet. I required it. That's all. The elevator doors closed. The morning was very bright. I walked out into it, and I didn't look back. Not because I was being cinematic about it, but because there was genuinely nothing back there that I needed. The succulent needed water. I had a flight to catch. Denver was waiting. And somewhere in a server that nobody at Hargrove and Sloan had thought to check, there were 17 pages with my name on every single one. I've thought a lot about the moment Preston took that microphone and said I was easy to miss. Not because it still stings, it doesn't, not anymore, but because of how perfectly it illustrated the thing I had spent 4 years getting wrong. I thought being good at something was enough. I thought if you showed up, did the work, caught the errors, saved the contracts, built the models at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, that eventually the room would notice on its own. That accuracy and effort had a kind of gravity to them, that they'd pull recognition in eventually, the way the moon pulls the tide. They don't. That's not how rooms work. That's not how rooms work. That's not how organizations work. That's not how people work. What I learned, not from a book, not from a mentor, but from 4 years of being the answer to problems that got credited to other people, is that competence without documentation is just a story you tell yourself. And stories you tell yourself, no matter how true they are, don't show up in performance reviews or billing records or legal disclosures. Paper does. The 17 pages I built weren't an act of revenge. I want to be clear about that. I built them because Sybil asked me a specific question: what can you prove? And I realized I had been living my entire professional life in the territory of what I knew but couldn't prove. That's a dangerous place to live. Not because people are necessarily out to take from you, but because systems, legal systems, corporate systems, HR systems, are designed to respond to evidence, not to feelings about what's fair. Preston didn't lose his title because I was angry. He lost it because a version-controlled document showed my user ID as the last editor on a model that was built under his team's name, and because a Slack message existed in which my supervisor wrote, "Great catch, let me handle it from here." And because Constance knew 2 people on an advisory board, and because Sybil knew exactly which questions to ask the SEC. None of that required me to raise my voice or send a single aggressive email. It required me to have kept records when keeping records felt pointless. That's the part I want people to hear, not the satisfying ending. Though I'll be honest, Director of Financial Analysis at $127,000 in Denver is a very satisfying ending. But the part before it, the part where you sit by a creek on a Saturday morning and decide that your contributions are worth documenting, even when no one's asking you to, that your work is worth protecting even when you're not yet sure what it needs protecting from. Integrity is not just about doing the right thing in big moments. It's about keeping accurate records of small ones. It's about knowing what you built and being able to say so quietly and precisely when the time comes. The time always comes. Constance didn't rescue me. Sybil didn't rescue me. Sybil didn't rescue me. The 17 pages did. And I wrote them myself, one entry at a time over months, when I wasn't sure they'd ever matter. That's the part that was hard. Not the confrontation, not the disclosure. Not even leaving. The hard part was continuing to document things carefully during a period when nothing was happening, and I didn't know if anything ever would. That's what resilience actually looks like, I think. Not the dramatic moment. The quiet, consistent, unglamorous act of showing up for yourself before anyone else has agreed to. Preston is somewhere now. Probably fine in the way that people with his kind of background are usually fine. I genuinely don't spend time thinking about him. I have a team of 4 people in Denver whose work I credit by name. That matters more to me than anything that happened at the Kessler Lodge. The succulent is still alive. I call that a win.